Well, it's Easter Monday, and it's good to once again be with my dear friend Dave. I'll leave the old out,
Thank you.
and we really
Nice
enjoyed.
haircut, Mike, by the way. Nice haircut. Looking more like me
Yeah,
every day.
it's a do-it-yourself job, so yeah, I'm not sure when I'll get you a hairdresser again. So, but like I said, looking like you. And David, it was just so much fun the other day talking stuff, and we thought we'd do it again, number two.
Yep.
And we'll just keep doing these for a while, and hopefully they're helpful. If not to anybody else, they're certainly helpful to ourselves as we share thoughts. It's often in the sharing, in the digging deep, that you find redemption for yourself.
Yes.
And I heard somebody say that even if a diary or a journal is just purely for you to clarify your thoughts, it's doing its job. So
Absolutely, yeah.
we're just going to carry on. And in December, I read Michelle Obama's book, Becoming. And one of the things that she says, which is quite powerful, she talks about Barack. And she says that he had a buoyant faith that if he just stuck to his principles, things would work out in the end. And I think that's quite powerful because principles are things which are timeless, which apply in all situations, within a virus, outside a virus, in good times, in bad times. And Dave, one of the questions I just want to throw at you is when you think of principles and you think of the time that we're in right now, are there any principles that really just stick out to you that you know these are like an eighth beat? And maybe you can explain the eighth beat a little later on. But these are like an eighth beat that you come back to because it's going to keep you strong and it's going to keep you centered, almost like a rudder.
I think this is a fascinating discussion, isn't it? So, I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey, and Stephen Covey talks a lot about, you sow at certain times, you reap at certain times, and then so there are seasons and principles. He calls the farming principles, that if you work with the farming principles, you'll always reap. So I love that. I love the idea that there are principles in our lives that if we apply them at the right time, they will always produce good fruit. I was thinking about this podcast, and I had an idea of what we were going to talk about. And one of the questions, this question came up, and I guess the first thing I wrote down on my piece of paper was this: never make a change out of the place of fear. It's a principle because when things come at us, we firstly are gripped. I get gripped with fear. That's my first reaction. I think everyone's, isn't it? Is this going to harm me? What can I do? What are my options? What can I change? Where can we go? I'm quite impulsive as a person, but I have seen over and over and over again people making very bad decisions based out of fear. And so the first thing I would bring to bear, and certainly in a time like this, is not to make any decision at all, but to just stop, just to take stock, to reflect, to bring all activity to a stop and wait, be still, and learn to calm and still the fear, and then learn to then make decision out of faith. I love that word, the difference between fear. The opposite of fear is faith. And faith based on, an innate sense that you have all that you need to make something right, that the universe, God, and outside another power is working with you. I take a scripture once at the beginning of every year. And in fact, the scripture that I actually read for myself in my own little thinking was all things will work together for good. And it's a foundation principle that I genuinely believe that if we don't react out of fear, all things, no matter what it is, will work for my good if I respond to it rather than react to it. And that's the secret in my life, is to quieten my fears down and then find that place of response rather than reaction from it. I would guess that would be my number one that I fear at these times.
Yeah, I so get what you're saying, and you mentioned the word response at the end, because as you were talking, it was, and I was trying to interpret it, it really was this, there's a difference between a reaction and a response. And it's sometimes it's counterintuitive because we feel we need to rush. That beautiful saying which says sometimes we need to go slow to go fast. And right now is probably that moment to slow down and just settle things. And as you said, a great principle is make decisions based on ease, calmness.
Yes.
Versus reaction versus fear. Because chances are fear-based decisions will hurt you.
Yep.
Whereas,
and I think right now we're bombarded by the news, and there's Facebook and there's news and there's noise. You can't make a decision in a place of noise. Another thing is what voice is the loudest voice in your life at the moment. I think it's that quietening all of these voices that are coming at us for us to react out of fear. I resonate with you. Coming down to a place of calmness, quietness, quietening those noises, those voices. Yeah.
I know that these first 2-3 weeks of lockdown in South Africa for me have definitely been, or I've seen them as a time of preparation, but it is that definite slowdown because there is this tendency to want to go and do something quick, and it's just slow down, just prepare the soil, and let's hear the right voices, hear the right thoughts, and in terms of what it is that we do. I heard, I think it's Susan David, a South African-born Harvard psychologist, and she says negative emotions are not necessarily a bad thing, but they're a very bad thing for making decisions. So we need to be curious about our negative emotions and say or ask, what is this telling me? But try not make decisions from them, because decisions from a negative emotion is probably going to be skewed. Just not. Yeah, just betting the gender. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, it's interesting. I get involved in counseling relationships and marriages sometimes as well. And relationships and marriages come into a place of crisis sometimes. Now, I think I said this before in another podcast we had, is never waste a good crisis. What happens, interestingly, when we face a crisis, a window of opportunity opens in our lives where we can say things to our significant other that in any other time you can't say. There's a moment of opportunity where those things that were left under the carpet, unspoken, now can be said. Yes. And it's important in whatever crisis we are, whether it's a relational one, and certainly in a relational one, that we recognize this window of opportunity that we have where everyone's vulnerable. Now there is a safe place in which to say these things through this window, but it's a window that closes, and it closes quickly. The minute we start to get back to some form of normality, or there's some order, or we start to even get used to the new norm, that window of opportunity closes.
Yeah.
And so,
I love what you're saying. Yeah, I love what you're saying, because if you think of a business right now, so I work with culture, you've worked with me in working with culture in organizations, you've done culture by yourself. And creating culture in an organization is a very intentional process that requires huge amount of resolve and consistency and pushing. And so often people are looking at the culture trying to be created, and they don't connect with the compelling why, and they're just sort of saying, why should we change? Right now, there's this window of opportunity for companies to create culture.
Yes.
And organizations should be sitting at home thinking, what is the culture I want to create as we get going?
Yep.
Because this is a window to let loose things that you have been struggling to put in place for the last few months, years, or whatever.
Absolutely. And we see this in government. Government are making seismic changes that they would have normally taken 3 years to bring about. They're bringing changes to their order book within days. Pharmaceuticals are pushing drug trials instead of 4 years into 6 months. Because what crisis does is suddenly opens a window. This is the time when you can reevaluate your company and say, well, have we drifted? What are the things that we should be cutting off now? This opportunity where the window is open.
I saw a beautiful slide the other day, and it's basically like a multiple choice. And it says, who's responsible for getting your digital strategy into your business? And number one is CEO, number two is CFO, number three is C something O, and then number four is coronavirus. And I think it just really brings the point home in that so many things that maybe one has struggled to get in, you now are going to be able to implement, provided you use the window of opportunity that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to get us back to principles, because we want to try and keep this to about 15 minutes or so. I want to quickly share one, and then I want to get another one from you. So maybe you can comment on this one, and we can be quite quick with this. But one of the principles that always helps me is the principle of impermanence. Nothing in life is permanent. Life is always shifting. Life is always in movement. And nature shows us this every single day. The sun rises at a slightly different space, a slight fraction every single day, a slight minute later or a minute earlier. We have the seasons. I don't get this, but they say that our universe right now is expanding at this incredible rate. Everything that has life has movement, has motion. And one of the things or mistakes or assumptions that could be unhelpful to one is to see things as permanent when in actual fact, everything is impermanent. And it's, for me, a very powerful principle that we need to just keep coming back to is this too shall pass. Yes, there'll be the scars, there'll be the challenges, there'll be the growth.
That's fascinating, because I actually have written in my piece of paper, this too will pass. Okay. Yeah. Because of the sense of impermanence or permanence that we have. But of course, so let me ask you some questions around that. What we do when we're in something, and certainly when we've been in something for a period of time, we build up ways of acting. Paradigm is a series of things that we do that always guarantee us a result within that paradigm. Here's the challenge, though. When the paradigm changes, we have to unlearn all of the stuff that we had in the previous one. How, maybe as a how-to for people listening, give us some tips on how do we unlearn some of those behaviors that we had in the old paradigm. When the gates open, we're in a new paradigm. How do we unlearn some of those things? Maybe reflect on maybe some things you've had to unlearn and then relearn.
Look, I think the most important thing about unlearning is recognizing that the old has come to an end. And
right, I love that.
What often we have is an attachment to the old, which stops us from hearing the new.
Attachment. That's a great word. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for all of us, it's to recognize where we might be attached and to actually be honest and truthful when something has actually died. And we spoke about death on Friday. Some things have to die so that the new can be birthed. So it's very, very hard to let go of a paradigm if we don't have the awareness that we're actually holding on to it. I think the other thing that we need to do is continuously challenge ourselves through good questions as to what is new versus what is old. And in actual fact, you might even create a ritual around the things that are old and go and bury a piece of paper in the garden or something like that. It reminds me of the story of Steve Jobs, who desperately wanted Apple to stop talking about a particular version of an operating system. I think I've got that right. And how he came out onto the stage in typical Steve Jobs fashion and did a eulogy. And there was a coffin and there was a smoke. And basically, he sort of put the scrolls into the coffin. And it was strong storytelling or imagery to say, never, ever speak of that again. And sometimes we have to ask those questions, and then we might write it down and we might say, hey, Mike, this has ended. So me doing this with you and doing this with other teams is definitely something that I've had to recognize. This is the new. It doesn't mean that there won't be facilitated sessions where we're together in a room because magic happens there. but you believe that that's the only way.
Yes.
Is definitely something that I've had to grasp. And because I hate the phone, I hate I'm not a technology guy. I run from it. But I think the moment we recognize it and we name it,
Yes.
and then do something drastic.
A guy I read a lot. He's a quite elderly now. A guy called Tom Peters. He's a business guy. He was big in the 80s, 90s. So he wrote a book called Circle of Innovation. He had a picture of a VW Beetle, and the guy who owned the Beetle wanted the car to go faster. And so what he did is he strapped a big jet engine on the top of it. So now it went faster, but it didn't go around corners so well. So now he put these monstrous wheels on it and changed the suspension. It went around corners, but it couldn't brake very well. And so over a series of time, he kept bolting things onto this VW Beetle until what he ended up with was fit for no purpose at all. And what actually he needed to have done is to have reduced the Beetle down to a bunch of parts and re-innovated something from scratch up.
Yeah.
And what we tend to do is we take something that worked before and try and bolt on new theories or new ideas. But often all we do is we just create this bigger monster inside that actually consumes huge amounts of time while we try to re-engineer something. But actually, these moments of crisis often enforce us to go back to a white piece of paper. Yeah. And we start from the bottom up.
You know what I love about your illustration is that the new is often built on the old, but the old is just seen differently.
Say that again. That's very good.
So the new is built on the old, but the old is seen and used differently. So you take that Beetle that you were talking about. It's not as if the parts are necessarily discarded. The parts are used in a different, new, fresh way with new innovation as well. So none of us are losing everything. It's often an aspect that is shifting, and you're just reimagining. And that's Tom Peters, that you're reimagining something.
So re-innovate, reimagine, celebrate what was. A good relationship counselor used to say this: what we don't do well is celebrate what we had, and and then bring it to an end. Take the bits apart, reimagine what it could look like, re-innovate what it could be, and rebirth something. What we said last time, maybe death and resurrection, rebirth something new for a new age that we might be looking into.
And Dave, your final thought, and I know your beeper went to say we've got to land the plane, but where you've got a paradigm that you're struggling to shift through is find evidence to demonstrate that your assumptions around the paradigm are wrong. Mm-hmm. So the more evidence, so confirmation bias is we tend to find the stuff that supports our current ways of doing things, our current beliefs. But when I step out and I begin to find evidence that this can work, that the new is blossoming. So think about evidence that we might need right now. Disruption like this, disruption is not unprecedented. The speed of this disruption is maybe, and the reach of this disruption is maybe new. But disruption in business is not unprecedented. And so again, we go back to Apple. Apple many years ago was 2-3 months away from liquidation. Look at it today. Wherever any of us are battling, this new life can come, and find evidence that shows that that people do get up, they do take new paths, they do things that were considered impossible, and we can take a lot of hope in that.
This too will pass, absolutely, and we take hope that we will, if we use these principles, they will always produce good fruit for us. And excellent, really, really good.
We didn't get to your next principle, but maybe next time.
We'll do it next time. Really good talking to you, Mike, and thanks for inviting me to your podcast.
Yeah. So Dave, Mike, Cafe Life, London, South Africa. This is. May you have a great week. May it be a strong week, and may you never lose hope.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Speak again.
Thanks, Davey.